Hey. All right, we'll get ourselves started. So just here's a quick recap of our agenda. So we'll start off just right now with our welcoming folks in. We'll keep admitting folks in through the waiting room. And if you're just joining us, hi. So then we will jump right into our priorities. So we have three. We have the Climate Solutions Now Act. We have the Transit Safety and Investment Act. We have the Public Service Commission Climate and Labor Test. We also, as part of our meetings, if you are in Montgomery County, we encourage you to talk about the Community Choice Energy Bill from Laura Charkoudian. Monica is actually going to lead a breakout room at the end of the meeting, specifically just for MoCo folks. So we will do that when we get there, but we'll, in our main agenda tonight, we'll just review those first three priorities. Then we will review our top tips for lobbying and our sample meeting agenda that we have for you for the Climate Action Lobby Week. And then we will do a role play example where I will be pretending to be Speaker Adrian Jones, and we will have our folks on the call, our staff on the call, do a quick role play. Then from 7 to 7:30, we will do that. We'll do the MoCo breakout session, and we'll have a Q&A. One thing I forgot to mention is that when we go through the priorities, we will take one question each. I will be selecting that question from the chat. And then if we don't get to your question, hopefully we'll be able to answer it at the end. But we will take one question for each bill as we go through. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jamie DeMarco.
Hi, thanks for that. And thanks everyone for being on tonight. This matters more than anything right now, because I think especially for all of these bills, but especially for the Climate Solutions Now Act, this bill is looking really strong in the Senate. It should have a vote in the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee on Friday of this week. And we have assurance with the Senate president has told us that he expects this bill to pass the Senate. And now we just need to make sure it will also pass the House. And I believe the only way it's going to pass the House is if there is a groundswell of momentum coming up from the grassroots to every legislator, to legislative leadership. And that is impossible without people all over Maryland speaking directly to their lawmakers. So thank you for taking time out of your evening. Maybe you were on Zoom calls all day and you chose to get on another Zoom call to defend this planet and the people who we love on it. So thank you for making that commitment. I'm going to briefly overview Climate Solutions Now Act. I'm going to say it briefly and then share screen to go over it on a fact sheet as well, but I just want to say it once when people aren't reading as I'm speaking. Big picture, the Climate Solutions Now Act does two things. It sets really ambitious and equitable goals, and it takes meaningful, common sense solutions enacted now. On the goals, it says that we as a state need to reduce our emissions 60% by 2030 and have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And it also says we need to achieve these goals with equity. The bill charges the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities with deciding on a percentage of state funds that are spent on climate change that must go to overburdened communities. This provision is based on a provision in the New York law, the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which required that 40% of all state funds spent to address climate change must go to environmental justice communities. That is widely considered to be the gold standard for environmental justice policy at the state level, and that's what we're trying to replicate here in Maryland. The bill also says that we are going to create a working group that is going to convene building trades like AFL-CIO, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, pipe fitters, to make recommendations about how we can protect fossil fuel workers as we achieve this net zero society. So that's the goal. That's the big picture goal. And again, I'll share a fact sheet in a moment that'll go over all of that. And then in addition to that, the bill is called Climate Solutions Now because it enacts solutions now in addition to requiring us to make a long-term plan. It has a series of provisions like requiring state vehicles to be electric as the state fleet turns over, both in terms of passenger vehicles and in terms of buses. It also has provisions that requires new buildings to be far more energy efficient, and even requires that when large buildings do large retrofits, they need to be more energy efficient. The bill also plants 5 million trees between now and 2030, with 2/3 of the funding to plant those trees and about 500,000 trees being planted specifically in urban, historically redlined, and economically disenfranchised communities. I am now going to share screen. Can folks see this? Climate Solutions Now. Maryland can rebuild. Great. So as you can see, this goes over the goals. Again, requiring net zero. Net neutral means net zero by 2045. It's not an internet thing, it's an emissions thing, I swear. And an intermediate goal of 60% by 2030. Our goals right now are a 40% reduction by 2030 with no mandatory goals after that, which is not in line with the latest science. And it also invests in the overburdened, underserved communities, making sure that all future legislation on climate change is investing a certain percent of its funds into environmental justice communities and protecting fossil fuel workers. Here at the bottom, we have a list of some of the simple and effective immediate policies that we can enact. And I'll share a link to this fact sheet in the chat in a minute. The other provision that I forgot is that right now we have a program called Empower, which reduces our electricity consumption every year by about 2% through energy efficiency gains, because the cleanest kilowatt hour of electricity is the kilowatt hour of electricity you never used. And we would increase that from 2% a year to 3% a year. And that we are really excited about. And the bill actually requires that any new building that is built with at least 25% of the funds coming from the state needs to be entirely net neutral. And starting in 2033, all new buildings over a certain square footage will have to be net neutral. It also requires increased air monitoring of methane leakage at landfills, because we know there's landfill methane leakage happening, and there's some discrepancy in the data, and we need to make policies to reduce that. And the first step is to have an accurate count on what's happening now. I think that is my overview, and I'm ready for questions.
So we don't have any questions in the chat yet. I'm sure we will get them, but we can save the questions to the end. So with that, oh, we have one question, was what is the name of the New York bill again?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mouthful of a name, but it's the New York Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I'll put it in the chat. Climate Leader.
And I always remember that the New York Renews Coalition, I always call it the New York Renews Bill, because the New York Renews Coalition was a really powerful coalition that got it through. So that's another way. If you ever forget, I find that name a lot easier to Google, New York Renews, and then it takes you right to that. Okay.
Why would any party object to increasing from 2% to 3%? We actually have a lot of objections about that, and it's from the utilities, who love to sell electricity and don't love it when they can't sell electricity. So we actually are getting pushback on that.
Makes sense. All right, we will get to these other questions at the end. I want to make sure we have time to go through all the bills.
And could I just answer one more question? There's a question about tax incentives. The bill does include a provision, I forgot to include this on the fact sheet, that if you are doing a community solar project on a brownfield, then you will be exempted for personal property tax. So there are tax incentives to encourage community solar on degraded land. Now I'm done.
Now you snuck that last answer in. Very good. Okay. All right. Now moving on to Kristen Harbison from League of Conservation Voters to tell us about the Transit Safety and Investment Act.
Thank you so much. And what I'm delighted to see, so many people on this Zoom. It's very exciting. And I'm also going to share my screen for just a minute. All right, so let me turn this into a slide. So this is not a very exciting slide, but and you can't read a lot of it, but what I want you to notice is that this is a graph of where Maryland is in the world of transit. We are the red line in all of these things. So we are number one. We're number one, except that this is the number of breakdowns that happen in comparable states. So Maryland is number one in breakdowns in commuter bus rail, commuter rail in buses, in subways and heavy rail, and in light rail. So we are number one in being bad at maintaining our transit system. And that is because our transit has been starved of funding for many years, increasingly, especially over the last several years, as funding from the Transportation Trust Fund has increasingly been directed to road and highway expansions. So what the Transportation Safety and Investment Act does is it addresses this issue and says that we cannot get serious about climate unless we address our transportation sector, because the transportation sector is the single greatest carbon emissions source in Maryland and in the region. This bill works beautifully along with the Climate Solutions Now Act, which is why Maryland LCV has been prioritizing both of these bills together. So the Transportation Administration itself has identified that there is, over the next 10 years, a $2 billion shortfall to maintain our current fleet of buses, subways, light rail, and metro, as well as the infrastructure to make it. And that's not a misprint. It is $2 billion with a B over the next 10 years. And that's not anything exciting like expanding light rail, expanding our transit system, or things like electrifying our buses, or anything new. This is just to maintain the fleet as we have it right now. So that's a problem, because the transportation sector represents 41% of Maryland's climate pollution. And if our transit system isn't reliable, people won't take it. And so we get more cars on the road, and it contributes to the carbon emissions from our transportation sector. In addition to that, there's been a lot of stories over the last year about how public transit has declined has seen a tremendous drop in public transit. Nobody's taking public transit anymore because of the coronavirus. And that you would think to be true, but it's not. In Maryland, that is less true than almost anywhere else. Our public transit has been very heavily used, especially in the Baltimore area, and especially by our healthcare workers. A huge percentage, I think it's about a third of public transit riders, are healthcare workers who rely on public transit to get to their jobs that protect us and that keep us safe. So this is, in addition to that, as we're talking about, we want to make the best education system in the world. Baltimore City school children rely on public transit to get to school. If the buses are breaking down, we can't have the best education system in the country if our students can't reliably get to school. Add to that the fact that we know from a 2015 study out of Harvard that reliable access to public transit is one of the single strongest factors in the odds of escaping poverty. All of these, so we talk about the carbon emissions, we're talking about education, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about economic recovery, because transit jobs in public transit you get twice the number of jobs per dollar spent on public transit than you do in road construction. So economic recovery, healthcare, education, everything, climate, all of this is addressed when you fund public transit. What this bill does, very simply, is requires the MTA to fund at $500 million, so the basic level that is necessary to maintain our current fleet of buses, rail, subway, and light rail, plus the infrastructure to the state of good repair, to make sure that our system is reliable so that people can feel more comfortable taking public transit. That is what this bill does. It is a one thing, fund public transit to the adequate level it needs for all of these reasons. And that is my overview, and I'd love to answer questions.
Thanks so much for all of the thanks so much for all of the shocking information, Kristen.
It's startling, isn't it?
It's really startling. Yeah. So the question we have is, what about the fiscal note for this bill? How do we respond to legislators that say the fiscal note might be too large in a pandemic?
Okay. So that's a really great question, and I'm delighted that somebody asked it. First of all, this doesn't come out of general funds. This comes from the Transportation Trust Fund, which is a dedicated source of funds that can only be used for transportation projects. It can be used for highways, it can be used for public transit. That is the baseline. First, so there is no actual, when you're talking about a fiscal note and you're talking about the general funds, it's not coming from general funds. It's coming from this dedicated source. Beyond that, we're talking, this bill doesn't kick in until 2023. It goes till 2028. So it's a 6-year period that we're looking for a $500 million sector. And I see a question that in the chat, this affects every county in the state because every county in the state has some variety of public transit that is MTA funded. This is actually a parity bill to a bill that was passed in 2018 that promises guaranteed funding for WMATA, which is the Washington Marriott Metro. That bill was the one that required the MTA to do a capital needs assessment that let us know what the needs were for the MTA. So this is a parity bill. This is a second part of a bill that was passed in 2018. We can absolutely afford this bill. We can absolutely afford this bill in a pandemic with the Transportation Trust Fund if we prioritize it. And the budget outlook for the next 6 years by the Hogan administration itself demonstrates that we can fund this. This doesn't actually ask for any additional funds to what is already sketched out until the back 3 years of the 6 years that this bill is infected. So we absolutely can afford this bill. And more importantly, we can't afford not to do this. If we want to protect our children, we want to protect our healthcare workers, we want to make sure that we want to help people get out of poverty.
All right, thank you.
And I will put my email in the chat if anybody has any other questions about this, because there's a lot more statistics about this I would love to share with you.
Absolutely, and we will work to answer some of these questions at the end if we can. But also I want to say about all of these bills, so I will show you all the wonderful Lobby Week landing page that we have set up, and there are talking points and fact sheets about all of these bills available on the Lobby Week landing page. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Anthony to talk about the Climate and Labor Protection Consideration Act.
Yeah, hi. Is my screen sharing looking all right?
Yep, looks good.
Fantastic. So thank you, Emily, and thank you, Kristen and Jamie, for talking about your respective bills. They are very, very important and very large, encompassing, giant bills that'll do a whole lot of good. Not to devalue the bill I'm about to talk about now, but this one serves a slightly different purpose. It's a lot more specific and focused on what exactly it addresses. And again, my name is Anthony Fields, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Maryland Campaign Coordinator. So the bill I'm talking about today is the Consideration of Climate and Labor Act, HB 298 and SB 83. And a lot of you might recognize this bill from last session, as a similar bill was introduced by Delegate Charkoudian and Senator Kramer, and they've reintroduced it this session, initially with slightly different language, but I'll get into some changes here in just a moment. But specifically what it's looking to do is require the commission, the Public Service Commission, to consider the maintenance of fair and stable labor standards and the protection of the global climate by way of supervising and regulating certain public service companies. As you can see here on the screen, specifically what it'll do is require the PSC to consider climate change in its regulation of the electricity sector, basing their information on the best available science from the IPCC. It would also require that state agencies would consider climate impacts when providing input to the PSC regarding applications for new facilities. Aside from the climate consideration, there is also the labor aspect of it, and we're very happy to have labor on our side on this bill. Specifically, we're working hand in hand with LIUNA, and what it has for labor in this bill is, again, a consideration of labor similarly as they're considering climate, by requiring energy companies applying to disclose the benefits that they will be giving to workers on these specific energy projects. We're seeing in the state of Maryland more and more energy projects contracting out to, just out of state companies and just various companies from around. And we want to make sure that these are high quality, sustainable jobs, that they're getting, great benefits and wages or what have you. To give a little background of why this bill, came about, a few years ago when CP Crane, a former coal plant, shut down, they applied to repower as a gas plant, and the PSC looked into that application process and was leading the application process. And through that process, they actually stated that they do not specifically or generally consider climate change in their proceedings. And then the PSC staff went on to agree and essentially say that, yes, they have never had to, review consideration of climate change, and they never will unless, they're required to in the future. Similarly, in testimony submitted to the Senate Finance Committee last year, the PSC also stated that the commission is not mandated to make decisions about labor standards. So they're essentially saying for both of these, climate and labor, that they've never had to consider them, they don't plan to, and they won't. And this is why Delegate Shakudian really made it a point to get climate and labor together to support this bill and the language and kind of close these loopholes and bring the Maryland PSC up to speed with other PSCs in the area, including Washington, D.C. and other states around the country. Some more background about where we're at this session. Last session, it was introduced last session. It passed the Senate Finance Committee and the floor, but was halted due to COVID. And we were very confident it would have passed had session not come to a halt because of the, the global pandemic. This session, is going to introduce or has introduced some unique difficulties. And it's, it's a whole unique, we're all learning and kind of figuring out how to do things virtually, but everything has been going great. It recently passed through favorably the Senate Finance Committee, and we're currently just waiting for a floor vote in the Senate, and then the House ECM vote as well. And we remain optimistic. Currently, we are, prioritizing reaching out to ECM folks, and we can get into that a little bit later. But this is just a very straightforward and specific bill to ensure that climate and labor is considered properly, ensuring that we are looking at energy projects that won't hurt Marylanders, but benefit them both economically and ensure that they are not continuing to be harmed by fossil fuel infrastructure and energy infrastructure that would bring more toxic emissions to their state. The last thing I want to say before we get to questions is that this would affect all new applications. This would not be retroactive, so it would not currently affect any existing energy infrastructure, though it could affect existing coal plants that shut down and then want to repower with gas as a new facility. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm not seeing any current questions on this bill, but I know one that has come up before is here's some more. Okay. This is kind of, there's a general question about how does the PSC consider climate, and how will they consider climate, and then and how will they consider labor?
Yeah. So in terms of the climate question, so one way that they're going to be considering it is looking at the specific impacts that the energy facility will bring to the area, you know, emissions, how that might impact sea level rise and just general climate effects. But another addition that they're looking at is how climate change could impact those energy facilities and specifically the siting of those facilities. For example, you might have a gas plant on a riverbed, and you know, if they're not looking at how sea level rise is being impacted by climate change and the fact that that sea level will rise in the next 5 years and that would flood the facility and cause a whole, you know, host of issues, that's also not something they're currently considering. Obviously, when they look at the sites, they look at, you know, a number of different aspects, but they haven't been considering how climate change might change and impact the siting as well. In terms of the labor, it's again sort of what I just mentioned on the last bullet point here is they will be required to disclose benefits that they're giving to their workers on specific projects. So specifically, they're going to be looking into wages, health benefits, all the other sorts of benefits, and comparing the wages to wages across the state and you know, similar jobs being done across the state as well. Again, the idea is that more and more work is being contracted out, and that you know, the state and the legislator wants to make sure that these are being, you know, high quality jobs being offered to these laborers. And I'm going to put my email in the chat, so I'd be happy to answer more questions and get a little more specific into things.
Yeah, we do have a couple more questions on this bill in the chat now, but yeah, we'll also try to get to that in the Q&A session.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just want to address this last question.
Go ahead.
I'm going to sneak one in too. So Stephen asked, could or would this impact coal plants that want to switch to gas? Yes. Again, part of the reason that this bill kind of came into being is that CP Crane, a former coal plant, shut down and then wanted to repower as gas. And through the proceedings is how we found out that the PSC doesn't currently consider climate. And we believe that if they were able to, that, you know, things would have at least come out a little bit differently. And we would have been able to have those considerations and seen the report, and the PSC would have been able to kind of talk about the climate impacts. So yes, it would affect that.
Okay, great. I feel like everybody got to sneak in at least one or two questions. So I feel good about that. All right. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about lobbying itself. So now you have a little bit of background about what we're lobbying about. Now, how do you actually lobby? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to share some of our top tips. Oops. All right. Okay. So let's talk first about what makes a lobby visit successful. Number one is staying personable, patient, and sharp. So that means generally, you know, being a good human here, being patient, and sharp here also to me including admitting uncertainty. So like if you don't know the answer to a question, don't try to make something up just to sound smart. You sound smarter if you say you don't know and that you'll get back to them on that, because it might be a really complicated question. So coming in confident, personable, sharp, the top tip. Next tip is making sure you know your specific goal ahead of time. So we're working to give you as the best possible ask for your legislator. So what you're going to be requesting that they do. We're going to be basing that off of where the bills currently are and their position on committee. So we're going to be sending that to you and your team tomorrow if you've RSVP'd for the lobby week. And so you will know your specific goal ahead of time, which is to make sure you ask about these three bills in a very specific way. You're going to want to know your target and tailor your pitch. So I highly recommend looking up your legislator beforehand, knowing their position. On our Lobby Week landing page, we have a cheat sheet of legislator positions, which includes if they've, it's all their public opinions about the bill. So if they've co-sponsored, voted for or against it in a previous year, that's all included on our website. So you definitely want to look at that and know you might be talking to somebody who's really supportive, or you might be talking to somebody who tried to vote against the bill in committee. So that's a really important thing to know going in. You also, you might have, you might know that they care about a particular angle on the bill, and that's also something you want to include. You want to make sure you have compelling facts and stories, so things that really really get to the what's the main point of the bill, why does this matter. We have there's a lot of climate stories, and in fact we're if you haven't seen it, we're collecting stories right now for our Why Now campaign. Those videos will be featured at our rally, but it's good to come with personal reasons, personal stories that are really poignant or really important facts that you think really get the point across, but the very specific and compelling ones. You want to build that relationship, so thanking them for their time, thanking them for their support of past issues, thanking them for maybe other things that they've supported that you know about, that you care about, taking that moment to connect with them in a way that's unique. Making sure you have a strong ask, so being very clear about what you want them to do. That's, again, we're going to make that really clear to you what we think the appropriate ask is, but you want to make sure that you do your best to get to that ask and make sure it's clear, as clear as possible by the end of the meeting, where the legislator stands on these priority issues, so that you can report that back to us, and we can all work together to follow up appropriately. But you can't do that if your ask was very vague or that you didn't get to it. You want to make sure that that's really clear. And you want to, in that vein, you want to take great notes and have a follow-up plan. So, if you can't quite remember, you go through the meeting and it seemed pretty good, but nobody took notes and it was like, oh wait, what was their position on that bill? That's not a situation you want to be in. So take great notes. We have a form for you to try to make it as easy as possible. And also, that's one of the benefits of being virtual, right? Is that you can take notes and have your notes up during the meeting in a way that you can't necessarily pull off in person. So that's a really key point. And then in terms of having a follow-up plan, in our sample meeting agendas, we've actually drafted a sample follow-up email for you that you can customize depending on how your meeting went and who was in it. But there's going to be a follow-up email that is going to be included in that meeting agenda. So that's what makes your lobby visit successful. Some potential pitfalls are losing your temper. It can be very easy and tempting to lose your temper, especially because this is a really important issue, and we're up against deep pockets, and it can be really, really tempting to get frustrated. Like, why don't you see our point of view here? Just remember, it doesn't really do you any favors in terms of getting that legislator to do what you want. So you can be very firm and very clear about what you need and and not compromise on your values and your opinion, but try not to lose yourself and get too frustrated. So not knowing relevant info about your target, again, if you don't know if they've supported it in the past or have voted for it, that wouldn't be good. Losing track of time or not prioritizing. These meetings are generally pretty short. They're about 15 to 20 minutes each. And you have 3 bills to get through. So that's something you want to just make sure that make sure you're prioritizing what you talk about in those meetings. And we have that pretty clear for you in that sample meeting agenda. Having too many facts or statistics, pick the compelling ones. This is kind of a counterpoint to that compelling facts and stories. This is overwhelming and not picking, getting too lost in the data and not picking like what tells a story and what really showcases the situation. So you want to make sure you pick the best talking points, and we have sample talking points for you, of course, and you'll hear some examples when we get into that lobby training. Again, not personalized, not knowing if the legislator has supported things in the past or what their general position is or anything about them. Not coming away with the legislator's clear position. Again, just make sure that before you end that meeting, can you tell me like how do you support it? And make sure that's clear. Are you willing to talk about this with your colleagues? Are you willing to, call Speaker Jones? That might be the ask. So make sure you have that clear ask. And this is just really reiterated here, just not having a plan for making that ask or any ask at all. We've actually had that happen where people just kind of meet and they're very happy to shake your hand and say hi, and they'll talk about what they want to talk about. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I got to go to another meeting, and you didn't actually get to the ask. That can be tricky. All right. So now I'm just going to show you what we've got for a sample meeting. So this is actually on our website. So with sharing my screen, it's hard to get to the tabs up all in here on the top. But okay, so here is our lobby climate action lobby week landing page, and you'll see on here all the details that you need to know about the event, as well as all of these great materials for you, our fact sheets. We've got the Zoom backgrounds that we have up ourselves right now. So one of those is this sample meeting agenda. So that is here. And what you'll do with your team is make a copy of this document. So you just go to File, Make a Copy. And then that'll make a copy here, which I've already done for this meeting. And you'll want to put, you can do a unique one for each legislator, and especially if your legislators have really different asks or maybe different people can attend at different times, that would be suggested. And your district captain will want to make sure that they have shared that link with you, that document with you. But anyway, so you will, we've already assigned everybody, and we're about to hop into our fake legislator meeting. So step one is introduce yourself, confirm how much time the legislator has. That's a really important step that your facilitator will want to do. So like, maybe they've scheduled 15 minutes, but they only have 10. That's really important for you to know right at the top. You want to thank the legislator for co-sponsorship or support of other bills. And then we have that cheat sheet that I mentioned before linked. And the person who's going to lead that introduction is going to be your district captain. Typically, in our case, that's going to be Jamie. Then you're going to want to do group introductions and personal stories. So if you have 1 to 4 people, I recommend everybody going around and introducing at least their name and where they live. And 1 to 2 people, when they introduce themselves, will say, and I am I just want to say this is a really important issue to me because I'm a parent or I'm a nurse or what have you. And if you have, you don't want to, if you have people in your group that have really compelling stories, you don't want to skip that step. Because again, that's what sticks out in the legislator's mind. So we're going to have Monica and Anthony give slightly longer introductions. So then after the introductions have wrapped up, our facilitator will say, we'd like to discuss 3 or 4 if you're in MoCo bills with you this evening, list them out. And then we'll say, and I'm going to, Jamie in this case is going to do it. So he's going to say, I'm going to first talk about the climate solutions now and say the ask, which again, you'll get the ask from the event organizers as to what the appropriate ask will be for the legislator. So then after that person is done, they're going to pass it to the person who will talk about the transit bill. They'll do the same thing, go, 1 or 2 highlights, what you could get to the ask. And then consideration of climate and labor. In our case, that's going to be Anthony. Our ask is he'll do the ask. And then if you're in Montgomery County, you're going to talk about community choice energy, which Monica is going to give a little, we're going to do a breakout about that at the end of our full program. So if you're in MoCo, you'll do that. And then you just want to think about who is gonna try, if there are like objections or like strategic responses. Mostly that would be the person who like gives that overview. But if there's somebody in your group who's like maybe more knowledgeable about the bills, has had the time to like read them and really read the fact sheets, you just want to kind of have that person who everybody will like wait to speak up, basically. And then who's doing the closing? That'll usually be the district captain, again, to just say, okay, thank you for your time. We will follow up, and just thank them for the meeting. And then they usually have to go off to do something. Okay, other really important roles are your note taker. So we have a reporting document that I mentioned earlier that you can even just keep open. Yeah, again, the benefit of being virtual, you can just have this stuff right up. You can also have your fact sheets and anything you need up. So they'll say what's the, for each bill, what's their position and their notes and reasoning and what y'all think the follow-up should be. Okay. Oh, and then one last role that's also really important. Again, there's often not a lot of time in these meetings, so you want to have one person who can chat to the other folks like, hey, you need to wrap up. And in this case, it will be Danny, who will message us through the chat. Great, so that's the general flow. So you're going to try to again, these meetings are brief, so you want to make sure your pitch is strong. And if they're having a lot of questions, just know, they can get in touch with an advocate, like a lobbyist from one of these, like Jamie or Kristen or Anthony. If they really have deep questions and they need that kind of follow-up, then, just say that you'll get them in touch if they really have a lot to say. That's not, you're not expected to be an expert here. You're expected to give an overview, have your personal story, and get their position. And if they really can't give you their position because they just have too many questions, then that's probably a job for one of our lobbyists. And finally, here's that sample follow-up email that you would want to send after your meeting with all of the fact sheets linked. Okay, so with that, we are going to do our meeting role play. So my role players, are you ready?
I was born
Ready.
Born ready. Okay, excellent. I'm going to turn off my camera, and then I will come back as Speaker Jones, and then I will turn off my camera again, and I will no longer be Speaker Jones, and then we will get into our breakouts. Okay. All right. Hello.
Hello, speaker. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with us today.
No, yeah, really happy to meet. I love meeting with constituents. I see we've got a number of folks in the meeting, so I'm sure you got a lot you want to talk about. So I'll let y'all introduce yourselves.
My name's Jamie. My pronouns are he, him, his. I work at the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I live in College Park.
Great.
And my name is Anthony Field, he, him, his, and I live in Randallstown.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I go by she, her, hers, and I also live in Randallstown. I am neighbors with Anthony.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Monica O'Connor. I am she, her, hers, and I think I'm supposed to live in Randallstown. Okay. Yeah, so I live near Danielle and Anthony.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you all.
And Speaker, just to make sure we're timing things correctly, how much time do we have with you today?
So I have to be off of this call by, really, I should be off at 6:58.
Okay, we're going to be really quick. First of all, we want to thank you for the Black agenda that your office put together and it's advancing in Annapolis. We think that kind of legislative leadership on racial justice issues is what the state has needed for a long time, and we're really glad that you're there to deliver. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm really, really proud of what my office has put together. It's just a lot of things that have been put by the wayside, and we're really proud of this package. So thank you for mentioning that. It's really important to me this year.
And we wanted to talk to you today about the Climate Solutions Now Act and the need to pass climate solutions this year. And we've got a few of your constituents here who can tell compelling stories about this issue.
Speaker Jones, I'd like to start. As I said, my name is Monica O'Connor, and I am a mother of children who are entering adulthood, and they are starting out their lives in various places of graduate school or coming out of graduate school and college. And I am really concerned about the cost of climate change for young people. I mean, they're beginning their lives, and we know that the cost to cities and taxpayers is going to be enormous, and that's going to fall on their shoulders. And the other concern I have is they are really questioning whether it's ethical and moral to have children. And you know, as their mother, that's very intense. And so I feel like we need to deal with this situation and take it off their shoulders as much as possible.
Thank you, Monica. I do a lot. I do really, my office does prioritize children, you know, about the blueprint bill that we worked so hard to pass last year. So thank you for sharing your perspective and about your kids' future. That's really important.
Yeah, hello, Speaker. And again, my name is Anthony, and it's very nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. While I've lived in Randallstown for a number of years, I'm actually from Texas. And so I still have friends and family there who are raising kids, and, you know, all the way up to my great grandmother. And as you might know, right now they're experiencing a quote unquote once in a generation winter storm that's causing a lot of issues with the infrastructure, as well as affecting the health and leading to loss of life, unfortunately. And while there's a lot to be said about that, what I would specifically point to is the fact that these once in a generation issues, these winter storms, these hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, droughts, food shortages are only going to become more and more frequent when the climate crisis really starts to ramp up. And we need to, all the bills that we're going to be talking about today are extremely important, and we think go a long way in addressing and helping mitigate the worst that this climate crisis will bring. And I think the state should really consider continuing to be a leader on this issue, or, you know, so that we don't continue to have catastrophes like this occurring even more often.
Wow. Well, my heart goes out to your family in Texas. Thank you for mentioning that to me. I'm, you know, it's a really serious situation, and I know we have a lot to do to respond, but, you know, my heart really goes out to your family, and thank you for telling me about that.
And so we know we need to take action this year, and we think the Climate Solutions Now bill is a really good bill to do that. And Danielle, were you going to talk for a few minutes about the top lines of the bill?
So I think Danielle had to step away, so you might want to just go to.
Yeah, she said she had a call.
Yeah.
Sorry. Important things are happening. Sorry, Danielle had to run out of the room all of a sudden to take a call. But this bill, broadly speaking, is going to align our greenhouse gas reduction goals with what the latest science says from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it will ensure that we achieve those goals with racial equity in mind while protecting our fossil fuel workers. And it will implement a handful of common sense, low-hanging fruit, low-cost high mitigation policies immediately. So that's a quick overview of what the bill does. Do you have questions about the bill?
So of course, as speaker, I have to really work with my committee members, my committee leadership. So we really need to take into consideration all of those other priorities. And of course, this year, we have a lot to respond to, and we need to really prioritize funding. So, I like this bill. Of course, I think we need to do something on climate. I want to say that there's a lot that we need to get done this year. So I want to see what the committee does. And I want to see, make sure that our top line is COVID relief. So that's,
Thank you. Yeah.
It's a good bill. It's a good bill.
And the other bills that we are also asking you to pass this year are the Transit Safety and Investment Act, as well as the Consideration of Climate and Labor Act. We think that these all need to pass this year. The Transit Safety Investment Act will make sure that our buses are not breaking down on people in Maryland, and that we can make sure that the frontline workers who have been saving us in this pandemic, many of whom don't have cars, can safely and actually show up to work. And the Consideration of Climate and Labor Act will just make sure that as we're making decisions as a state about our energy infrastructure, we are considering climate. And since I jumped in and did a little bit of the highlights for the bill, I just want to turn it over to Danielle if she wants to make any asks or say anything else at the end here.
Yeah, forgive me, Speaker. I had to take a quick phone call, duty calls with my multi-million-dollar business that I now have created. I'm also a working parent who heavily relies on public transportation. And despite being a millionaire, I definitely need to still use public transportation. And I have been stranded in Randallstown with no place to go with my tiny baby in freezing weather, and that's just unacceptable in the state of Maryland. And I really think that we need to pass this bill. So I urge for your support. Thank you.
I'm really sorry to hear that that's happening to you, Danielle. I really hope you can, we can do something about that. Of course, like I said to Jamie before, our main concern is funding right now. We have our top priority is COVID relief. You might have heard about some of the COVID relief packages that we've put together. So I really much understand you. I know that a lot of my constituents rely on public transit. I just, what comes first? Is it COVID relief, rent relief, or is it public transit when, that it's not an easy decision to make. But I appreciate hearing your story. That's definitely going to stick with me. I don't want to picture you out in the cold with your baby. So I appreciate you bringing this to my attention.
Lastly, we just want to ask, are you willing to commit to moving these 3 bills through the House this year and passing them?
So like I said, I definitely need to consult with my committee chair. So can you tell me what committees these bills are going through?
Happy to. The Climate Solutions Now Act is primarily assigned to the Environment and Transportation Committee, ENT, and it is secondarily assigned to Economic Matters, ECM. The Climate and Labor Consideration Act is assigned just to ECM, right, Anthony?
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be voted on by ECM. The hearing has already occurred, and it's already passed through the Senate Finance Committee.
And ECM, again, is Economic Matters, in case you forgot, Speaker.
Yeah.
And the Transit Safety and Investment Act, I believe, is Environment Transportation. Is that right, Danielle?
And in appropriations as well.
And in appropriations.
Okay. So, we've got great leadership in all of those committees, and I really trust their judgment. But I like these bills. It definitely, lines up with my progressive agenda. So, we need to, like I said, my first priority is my own, the legislative Black agenda that we have worked on really hard, and the COVID relief. But what the issues that you've brought to my attention today are really important, and certainly something that is under consideration. And it's good to hear. I think that PSC bill, the fact that it's already getting some traction in the Senate, that's good to hear. And it sounds like it's does that have a fiscal note? Does that have a heavy fiscal note? The climate
Anthony?
and labor. Yeah.
Anthony, can you speak to the fiscal note of the Climate and Labor Consideration Act?
Hey, hello.
Hi.
All right, I think I was delayed because everything just like fast forwarded really fast. Sorry, what was the question? Was about the fiscal note, speaker?
Yes.
Yes, there is a small fiscal note this time around as opposed to last session.
Okay. Is it what? Can you tell me the range of that?
I believe it was around the $200,000 mark. But I can certainly check on that, speaker, and I would love to follow up with your office and your staff with specifics.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is going to factor heavily into my decision. So please send that information along. And it's gonna. There's a lot of decisions that we have to make this year, so I hope to do our best on everything here.
Mm-hmm.
But folks, it is 6:58. It is time for me to go. But thank you all for your time. I love meeting with constituents. Sorry that I can't meet you in person this year, but you all are. I really appreciate hearing your stories, and it really helps me to think about these issues in context. So thank you. All right, folks, have a great evening.
Thank you, speaker.
Thank you, speaker.
Thank you, speaker.
Thank you, speaker.
Hey, Emily, can I mention / ask something?
Sure, go ahead. And I'm
And,
back. I'm Emily now.
Yeah, Emily. Wow, the speaker was just here. I haven't seen you guys in the same place. So is it appropriate, and this is, I guess, could be a question to the other lobby folks that were just in that group. Would it be appropriate, because I do anticipate some legislators kind of pushing back and kind of giving us that like, oh, we're focused on COVID relief right now. That's what we need to talk about. Is it appropriate to point out that specifically, like, while COVID is important, obviously we want to make sure that there's economic recovery and stuff like that, that a number of these bills would aid that recovery. But second is that the COVID pandemic has really shown where we're weak and kind of how intersectional a lot of issues are. I mean, we have frontline workers, again, taking trains, and if they don't have quality transportation, that's a COVID relief, in my opinion, is the transit bill. We have folks that are having increased symptoms and higher chances of contracting COVID because of pollution and emissions. So I think climate related bills and renewable energy is a COVID relief issue. I know that's a lot to bring into a small meeting, but I don't know if it's worth imploring that they consider how intersectional these issues are.
Yeah, I think that we have to, I think it's important that we are very sensitive about how we talk about COVID and climate together. That was something like early pandemic that we did some research into. And, there's a lot of ways that we talk about like climate as like the crisis, right? Whereas now there's, a very immediate crisis. And they're equal in magnitude, but one of them is happening in a way that is very, much more tangible to meet people's lives immediately. So, I think that there is a way to bring it up. One of my favorite, well, not my favorite facts at all. I actually hate this fact. But a fact that I know is something that I try to keep in mind is that even a small increase in particulate pollution can really like in terms of the general air quality and exposure to particulate pollution over time has major impacts on COVID outcomes. So like we really are the intersection between fossil fuel infrastructure, climate pollution, and COVID outcomes is very much there. And I think it's just making sure to not minimize in any way the COVID crisis while talking about the climate crisis, because it definitely is out of touch. I'm interested to see if anybody else on the lobbying team has any thoughts on that, or how you've navigated it in your meetings. This is really turning into a Q&A from from everybody. So we are now in the Q&A session. Well, actually, before we jump into Q&As, I do want to just recap for everybody what the next steps are on Lobby Week. So then we'll fully jump into the Q&As and discussion. And also, we have time for Monica to, we'll have a breakout room, and it'll be a self-selecting breakout room. And if you are having trouble, if you want to be in the MoCo breakout room, and for whatever reason Zoom isn't giving you the option to join the breakout room, just rename yourself as MoCo or put it in the chat. But hopefully most people will be able to self-select into that. So with that preamble, let me let me just review with everybody our next steps. So our next steps are to, first of all, look out for intro emails with your team tomorrow. So that's, if you're watching the recording, that'll be on the 18th, Thursday. Look out for those intro emails. So that will come from me or Monica or Liam, who's my intern. And it'll be an introduction with you and your district captain and everybody else in your district. And it'll include your meeting times as well as the ask to your legislator. You should join the rally on the 22nd at 5, from 5 to 6. We have a lot of great speakers lined up. And then we'll have time to meet with your team from 6 to 6:30. Then you want to prep for your meetings with your team. So using that meeting, sample meeting agenda, getting everybody, I'm sorry, I'm very itchy on my nose. You're going to want to go through that sample meeting agenda with your team, highlight who's going to do what. As you saw in our role play example, and we have a lot of like professional lobbyists, sometimes you have to adjust and kind of go back. They don't have a copy of your meeting agenda. So if you need to adjust or be flexible, or something happens live, like and it was also a little realistic, right, that Anthony had an audio issue and somebody had to have something came up during the meeting. So be flexible, but doing your best to plan those out beforehand. So then you'll have your meetings, and your meeting times vary based on your district. So again, we will get that to you tomorrow. And then to wrap up the week, we'll be having an insider recap and social hour on the 25th at 8, just to recap everything that we accomplished in that lobby week, and also talk about our next steps to get these bills over the finish line. So if you have the energy and time, we'd love to see you then. Okay, so now we are fully in the Q&A. I am going to open that breakout room for MoCo folks. Right. Options. All right, allow participants to pick the room. And this will be called MoCo. So if you don't get the prompt and you are from MoCo and you want to be join that, just let me know and I will put you in there. MoCo. Okay. All right, so you can go ahead and join that. You should see the prompt. I'm going to put some folks in there. Great. Okay, right. So now we will get back to some of these questions. So let's get back to that question about how to talk about COVID and climate. So Jamie or Danny, do either of you have opinions on that or experience with that?
My audio cut out for a sec. Can you repeat the question again?
The question was, we're going back to Anthony had asked a question about how do we navigate discussing the relationship with COVID and talking about it as an intersectional issue with climate. What have you found in your lobby meetings so far?
The facts are definitely on our side. A recent Harvard study that I can put in the chat in a moment found, and Emily, while I'm doing this, I think you're going to put Doris in the, okay.
Yep.
The facts are on our side. A recent Harvard study found that even small exposures, even small increases in your exposure to fossil fuel pollutants makes you more likely to die from COVID-19. Even if you don't account for climate change, burning coal, oil, and gas is making us more likely to die from COVID-19. And when you look at why Black populations are so much more likely to die from COVID-19 than white populations, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that our fossil fuel infrastructure is disproportionately located in Black and brown communities. And so that said, I have had mixed success trying to make the case that this bill and these bills are a COVID bill. I think there's just some sort of like, people just psychologically have an initial resistance to seeing things in a new way, or being told that like, oh, like, it sort of feels, I think, to some people like we're trying to grab onto the hot topic, even though it's like a real scientifically proven connection. So I think it's just something to navigate wisely, but definitely a tool to use in our arsenal.
It's a good, good point. Okay, I'm gonna get to some of these questions from the chat. So will you send talking points, fact sheets, and materials to leads or to everyone? So everyone is going to get that link in their email tomorrow with that lobby week landing page. And I'm going to put that, I actually can just put that in the chat now if you're here, but it will also go out to everybody who is RSVP'd. So yes is the answer to that. Will the PSC affect the existing coal plants in Maryland? No, this bill does not affect existing plants. That is just not the scope of this bill, but it affects new or repowering plants. So in terms of retroactively affecting, I think Anthony can answer this question a little bit more.
Yeah, so the question of will it affect coal plants? If they continue to operate as coal plants, no, because it's not retroactive. But if the existing coal plant were to shut down and then request to repower with gas, as CP Crane does, then it would, this bill would impact that application and that decision process. So I think there's like 5 or 6 remaining coal plants. If all those were to shut down and say, hey, we want to repower as gas, and we pass this bill this session, then the PSC's new considerations would apply to that application process.
Great. Okay. Some more questions. Is everyone here assigned to a team with leads already selected? So yes, we have all of our district leads assigned. Again, you'll get that info tomorrow. That'll be based on your district, so no surprises on which team you're going to be on. Delegates have talked to refuse to commit to a position. Yeah, that can, I think I was doing my best when I was role-playing Speaker Jones to not answer your questions directly, because that is very much a politician thing to do. Or, I can say what I can say. So what you want to get is, are they, like I said, I'm broadly in support, but committee chairs is my reason. So that's just what you would say like support, but what's the rationale for that? And you'd say you'd include this is broadly aligned with her progressive worldview and progressive agenda, but she has other concerns and she kept mentioning the fiscal note. So you're going to want to, and then the next question is, what should the follow-up be? And the follow-up is, really she needs to be, there needs to be deeper conversations about the fiscal note. So it's, just do your best. And some legislators, they will, come out and say, I'm in support, but it's off my committee or whatever. And that's when you say, okay, I really want you to, take that support further. Your goal is generally to move them from either like, if they're supportive, like push them to like take more action. If they're like opposed, we're showing them support. We're showing them that their constituents care about this. So if they're like, it's harder for them to be as overtly opposed to it in that situation. So I understand that that's frustrating. But just do your best to get that, Jamie did a great job of trying to really nail me down. And that is what you want to do, and try to come away with clear notes on what the follow-up should be and what their rationale is. Okay.
To answer Betsy's question, I would say the strong ask that we made was, will you commit to passing these 3 bills through the House? Which is a kind of ask you can only make of a speaker, because they're the only one with the power to decide whether a bill passes like that. And for the response, we would have to say sort of unclear, said they needed to check with the committee chairs. Of course, if we then talked to the committee chairs, they would say, we waiting to hear what the Speaker's office said. So they just sort of pump the ball back and forth from each other. And that's just how we do it. They do it, but we're trying to nail them down. And often if someone gives a vague answer, I'll say, like, I understand you can't answer now. If we followed up with you in a week and a half, would you have an answer for us then? And follow up is 90% of advocacy. So I think that's a good tactic.
Great point, Jamie.
And I'm sorry if I could jump in, and I only want to do this because I don't think there was a question in the chat about this, but I just checked the actual fiscal note number because I wasn't 100% sure what the actual like to the number note was, and it's actually $219,500. So if they ask, you could say like $220,000.
Okay, great. What else? So who is responsible for setting up meetings? So for the most part, we have reached out. If your legislator is on committee, committee being one of the, in my role play, I asked like, what committees is this assigned to? They're the first ones to vote on the bills and give them a favorable or unfavorable report. So that's really like, you've got to get it through committee. So if your legislators are on committee, then we've reached out to them. We didn't, oftentimes when we're doing lobby week in person or lobby day in person, me and our interns will all like email and call, but I normally give a list to our lobbyist and say, okay, we haven't heard back from these folks. Can you literally go stand in their office and say, hi, I need you to schedule a meeting for me right now. And that's a lot easier to do. When we're completely relying on emails and calls, it is just a lot tougher. And they don't as readily take meetings with advocacy organizations as they do with their own constituents. So to answer that question, we have scheduled a lot of them. In some districts, your district captain is working right now to get those scheduled for next week. And sometimes you have a better shot of doing that with being a constituent, if you can say that. So that is, so right now we have set up most of them. Your district captain is working on them. Your district captain might ask you to help them set up a meeting, especially if your district captain is not actually a constituent. With some of, we have some staff and some volunteers who are really informed, who volunteered to be district captains, who are not from the district that they're leading. So we have done our best, and we will tell you which ones we have scheduled tomorrow. when we do our big email out to everybody to introduce everybody. And you'll get next steps on that from there. I hope that answers that question. Okay. Oh, and also in some districts where I also want to say in some districts where we really don't have a like a key target, or your legislator is unfortunately really just not likely to be supportive at all. We have alternative actions for you to take, and that, you know, we actually had some folks who came from who've come from this I'll just get parts of a completely Republican district. For the last, they actually would drive out to Annapolis every year for the last 3 years, and every time they either weren't able to meet with their representative, or they did and it was like really frustrating and it went nowhere. So for folks who are in that situation, we think that the best tactic is to overwhelm them with calls and emails. So we've arranged some actions to do if that's the situation that you're in. And then we're also going to introduce you to other people from your district, so you can continue to communicate and maybe build power together over, you know, and strategize about, you know, how do we deal with this. So I wish I had, I wish I could say that, you know, it would be, you know, really effective to meet with them. Sometimes it's, you know, we want to make sure your time as an advocate is also being spent effectively. So that's just what we've arranged for. All right. So we are not meeting with district groups tonight. We're meeting with district groups on the rally on the 22nd. Okay. All right. I think we've gotten through most of the questions. There were some questions about the bills maybe during the Q&A earlier. So let me go back to that. I see Anthony answered a question. Can this bill be implemented with the Climate Crisis and Education Act? Did they dovetail? Would either need to change if the other were implemented? They were written to complement each other. So in the Climate Crisis and Education Act, that question was about the Climate Solutions Now. The Climate Crisis and Education Act also has goals to get to net zero. So that is kind of like a second bite at the apple. Sometimes that's a common advocacy strategy, is to have pieces of bills, kind of like redundant bills, because, you know, if maybe like the larger thing won't pass, at least you get that piece. That's actually the case. There are a couple of bills that do things that the Climate Solutions Now bill does. Of course, we want the whole thing, so that's what we're focusing on advocating for. But an example of that is there's a bill that replicates the electric vehicle language in the Climate Solutions Now bill, which is a really great tactic. Jamie, I see you came on camera. Was there something you wanted to add?
No, I went off camera to take a bite of dinner. That was all.
Solid. Okay. All right. We answered a lot of the questions about I see Kristen Harbison answered a lot of those questions about the transit bill.
With this time, I'd just like to emphasize again, the only way these bills are going to move is if there's a groundswell of support. We've heard from leadership over and over, they only want to move COVID bills and very few other things. So things really need to be a top priority. And things don't just become a top priority because lobbyists ask for them. They only become a top priority if leadership and legislators are hearing it from every single possible angle. So this is really an indispensable tactic. And I know it's been a long call, but I just want to reaffirm the importance of the work we're doing tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right, well, it seems that we have answered most of our questions here. So if you have any more questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Like I said, we've recorded this session, so this will go out to everybody who will put this up on YouTube, and this will go out to everybody who has RSVP'd. And again, if you have any other questions, let me just also make sure that everybody has the link to our landing page. Again, this will go out tomorrow, but just like if you want to see it right now, that is in the chat. I am going to stop our recording now. So thank you if you've watched the recording.